Thank you.
And remember the reminder, the goosenecks right in front.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for that warm welcome, everybody. And as always, we must begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, enter the hearts of your faithful, and enkindle in them the fire of your wisdom and love. Dear Lord, just help these good people and help the speaker to convey the transcendence and the eternity into which you have created us, so that in this hope we may bring the peace and the joy of Christ to the world through Christ our Lord. Amen. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, it's going to be a little bit of a drinking from a fire hydrant syndrome here. And so I'm going to go first through a phenomenon called near-death experiences. Then I'm going to take a quick tour into terminal lucidity, which I'll explain in a moment, and then into intelligence in hydrocephalic patients, sum up the evidence and look at physicalist explanations for this and see if they are adequate. And then after that, I'm going to try and synthesize this into a theory of the transcendent soul body, as I will call it, and give you a sense of the transcendence into which you are made, the transcendence that actually is present in you and acting through you right now, and of course, the eternity in Christ that it betokens. So let's get underway and first start with, of course, studies. Some important studies in this area of near-death experiences, which I'll explain in a moment. Number one, the New York Academy of Sciences, the 2022 a consensus statement that basically affirms the likelihood that your consciousness will survive bodily death, the credible possibility that your consciousness will survive bodily death. I can't even imagine this happening like 15 years ago in the New York Academy of Sciences. But now the evidence is so overwhelming, they've actually declared it in their annals. So I just I want to pay attention to that and to the various studies on which it was based. Here are some of those studies. There is the Samuel Parnia Aware study published in the Journal of Resuscitation 2014 with 2,060 patients, a good peer-reviewed journal, an excellent study, longitudinal study with all of the safety nets in place. This is now available just on the internet free. The second, of course, is the well-known Pim van Lommel study in the Netherlands and Great Britain. This was a 2001 study, but still very valid today, very carefully done. And another study that's important is the one that's basically done by Dr. Kenneth Ring on blind people. And we'll talk about the significance of that in just a moment, because the blind being able to see during the time of clinical death is, especially in remote positions from their physical body, is just really hard to deal with from the vantage point of a physicalist explanation. Just a few other ones that are out there. The University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies in the medical school there has this whole department devoted to near-death studies, terminal lucidity, etc., near-death experiences. And Doctors Grayson, Kelly, and Harlick are really important folks there to look at. The website's there. It's all free of charge. Lots of good material, scientifically valid material that's there for you. I have that summarized in my little book here, shameless advertising, Science at the Doorstep to God. It's all summarized in chapter 4 of this book. But there's lots of good studies. I have them cited in my book, but I just want to give you a sample. These things are well done. We don't have to rely on anecdotal, not a single anecdotal story or so-called piece of evidence. I think going with the good longitudinal studies that have been done by Parnia, van Lommel, and others is just fine for doing that. Let's just take a quick look at, first of all, what is a near-death experience? And what happens and what can it reveal to us about a transcendental body? The first thing is when a person has a heart attack, maybe 10 to 20 seconds after that, the brain will, of course, lapse into what's called a state of real, almost clinical death, where you have flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, no gag reflex. Basically, you don't have any electrical activity in the cerebral or the frontal cortices, and on top of that, you've just got a few sputterings of neurons in the lower brain. Pretty much, you're not going to be doing any thinking with your physical brain at this moment. No electrical activity, no thinking. That's it. No recalling, no remembering with your physical brain. No vision. Possibly there might be hearing. There's some evidence that there might be something there, but no vision for sure. And of course, nothing like a complex thinking activity. Emotional activity is gone altogether as well, and a variety of other things. Now, when this happens, what happens in about 18% of adults and about 65% of children, so much larger number for the percentage for the children, and the reason I will submit later is there are much fewer things that need to be resolved in their lives, before they move on to another domain. But in the case of adults, it looks like about 18%. Some studies have it as high as 22%. Parnia has it all the way down to 12%. But in any case, in adults, just say about 18%. Do have what's called a near-death experience. In this case, I'm going to use the term the soul body, for lack of a better word, because there is both consciousness, cognitional activity, but there is also embodiment, there is extensionality, there's self-movement, which I'll just describe in a moment. But this soul body, leaves the physical body. When it leaves the physical body, it goes through a series of stages. Many of those stages I won't talk about today, lack of time. But the main thing is, as you move through that tunnel onto the other side, you can see your own physical body laying there. And then, of course, you could proceed to a lot of other places. At this point, you are being moved by a force beyond yourself. You're not moving through the walls of the waiting room and listening to the conversations there. By the way, never speak badly of the dead, because, of course, we have so many cases where people just go right through the walls into the waiting room next door and report the conversations later when they're resuscitated to their relatives, much to their surprise. But anyway, a note of humor. But they can actually move outside the hospital, as we shall see. So they're not subject to this, whatever it is that's emerging, what I'm going to call the soul body, or transcendent soul body that's emerging from the physical body, can go through walls, it can defy gravity, so it's not affected by the density of mass energy or by any kind of physical law or process or structure. It seems to be free of that. And in addition to that, though, it really does have a body. And I just want to note that this soul body definitely can see, definitely can hear, definitely can remember, definitely can recall. It is not just conscious, it is self-conscious. It has its memories intact. Its emotional proclivities are intact, almost the way that the emotional capabilities were exercised when they were alive in their physical bodies. So all of these things are intact. And one might think, well, that's just your consciousness and just your capacity for cognition. What's to say you have a body? In the vast majority of cases, of those who remember that they noticed it, and a lot of people are so amazed by what's going on around them, they forget to notice whether they had a body or not. But the vast majority of those who do take cognizance of it, they say for sure, I was embodied. Now, this is going to be a very different sort of embodiment than the one that Heather was talking about very precisely with respect to the physical body. This kind of embodiment has three features, just preliminarily to note. First of all, there's extensionality in this body. So the person does not feel like they're and disembodied consciousness, as it were. Almost, a disembodied consciousness, not really in space. Space and time is a different focus, but they're just, they do have a sense, though, that they're dimensional, they're extended. And in this extensionality, this extension that they have in which their consciousness and cognitional activity resides, it's self-moving. So there is some, control. You can move your seeming arms. You can move your body, at least little distances. As I said, a super force can move you outside the hospital or above the hospital or into a heavenly domain. That's not you. But within your local parameters, you have self-movement in that body. And moreover, that self-movement expresses your free will or your voluntary activity. So that's there. I'm just going to say that body, extended, self-moving, that body as well, this is a means of mediating relationship between other human beings. As I'll say in a moment, you encounter oftentimes 65% of adults that go to a heavenly domain, they encounter deceased relatives and friends. They see real embodied individuals in that domain. But as I'll say, different features of it, but they see embodied individuals. Those individuals are in the bodies, in the form, and the appearance, as it were, of what they looked like when they were 20 or 30, not what they looked like when they were 80, when they died, but rather 20 or 30, so a youngish body when they get there. Now, the reason I point this out is because the embodiment of all these people is a mediation of their interpersonal relationship. Just like on earth, right, the body is not just a physical apparatus, it mediates our emotions. You can see that through the face and through the eyes and through our movements or our so-called body language. We can see, what not only our emotional and cognitional perceptions or thoughts are, or ideas are, we can actually convey that to other people, and we can convey it intimately. Embodiment is an intimate way of conveying both emotion and connection with another human being. So that's what I'm going to mean initially by body here. You do have an extended self-moving embodiment that is accompanying your consciousness and cognitional activity, which mediates interrelationship, intimate interrelationship with other people that you know. All right, so this body leaves the physical body. It certainly, as we'll see in a moment, it can go through walls and so forth. It's not really inhibited by physical processes and structures. All right, the next thing to notice is that, when they're outside of their bodies, but still in this world, if I can put it that way, in this physical universe, they can report a lot of data that is verifiable after the fact. We'll call this veridical data, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But the main thing is while they're in this world, you can verify what they're seeing, what they're reporting, including what blind people, so hitherto, these people were blind from birth, didn't see a thing, don't have a single visual image in their physical brain, yet they are able to accurately report, 100% accurately, by the way, what is going on around them outside the hospital, in the waiting room next door, not just in close proximity to the physical body that is lying in the operating room, etc. So the main thing is, though, you've got this little time where this person, I'm going to call it this transcendent self, the soul body, is there in this world. And then, as I said, in adults, it proceeds over to another domain. Now, in about 70% of the time, adults will then move from this world to another world. Children, the percentage is a little higher that will go to another domain. About 80 to 85% of the time, those adults will go to a heavenly domain, a beautiful domain, a domain with a loving white light, as we shall see oftentimes, or actually with Christ, as we shall see in just a moment. But it's a domain, definitely a sense of being brought to fulfillment, etc. There can be a time of judgment, which frequently happens before they go there, but it's not a chastising judgment. It is rather something to inform them going forward, even if they should come back into the world by their own decision. But the main thing to remember is they go to this heavenly domain. About 15 to 20%, they go to a dark domain. Suicides often find themselves in a dark or lonely domain. It's, no one can say that it necessarily is eternal because we have no data on that. All we know is it's dark and lonely initially, and that scares a lot of people into not committing suicide again. But the other thing is cruel people sometimes actually go to a very horrifying domain. I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot of explanation of this in many of the studies that I have cited in chapter 4 of this book. The main thing, though, is there is a transcendent embodiment, all right? Now, try and look at the relationship between what I'm going to call the soul, which is responsible for consciousness and cognition. I'm going to look at this transcendent body, which mediates interpersonal relationship, even in a spiritualized way, and then the physical body. We'll look at that toward the end of the talk here. But for the time being, that seems to be where things end up. If they go to a heavenly domain, then 64% of those who go to a heavenly domain will meet deceased relatives and friends. This will become important as we try to verify the data in just a moment. About 69% will encounter this bright light. Many of those people identify the bright light as a loving bright light. Some of them identify the loving bright light with God, and some of them identify that light with Christ. So there are percentage breakdowns on this, but I didn't want to get into the weeds. The main thing, though, is importantly, I think 18% of those who have a near-death experience see a specific incarnated, recognizable Jesus Christ who identifies himself as Jesus Christ. And for the kids, he always identifies himself as Jesus Christ. By the way, that comes from the J. Stephen Miller studies. He went through all the 6,000 cases in this big data bank of near-death experiences and isolated the 18% figure. So let's just sort of, there it is. That's kind of in a nutshell. What happens about 18% of the time for adults, 65% of the time for children. And children almost always have a very heavenly experience. And adults, as I said, break down about 18-20. 80 pleasant, 80-20, 80 pleasant, 20 not so pleasant. Okay, let's look at the evidence now for this near-death experience. There's 4 major kinds of evidence. The first kind is called veridical data. That's where a person reports a totally unexpected or unusual set of circumstances, and then it's verified independently after the fact by researchers who are not associated with any kind of a study, but can actually be an objective source of verification. Okay, so for example, one lady says, okay, I left my body and I saw it there lying there on in the hospital operating room, and then I just went right through the walls of the hospital, and I found myself hovering above the 3rd floor of the hospital, and I was outside looking toward the hospital and looking at the 3rd floor ledge. And believe it or not, there's a tennis shoe out there. And the tennis shoe's got a worn left toe, and you can see that there's a shoelace sticking under the heel. It's probably been there since the construction of the hospital, and no one has seen it, just got left there by a construction worker. But there it is, and if you go outside the hospital, you'll see it. And of course, one of the researchers for one of the physicians that was working actually crawled out on the ledge of the hospital. And there it was, complete with worn left toe and shoelace sticking under the heel. Just saying. this is really hard to explain. I mean, how do you hallucinate an image that clearly? Another man, just for humorous, the nurses came in and said, we lost your dentures. He goes, no, you didn't. He says, the nurse with the red hair, she pulled my dentures out before they put the paddles on me. And there's a machine that looks like this, XYZ. And of course, she just jerked open the drawer underneath that machine and threw the dentures in there. So if you go to where I was in the operating room, look for that machine, that drawer's got my dentures. And sure enough, there they are. I'm just saying, this is really accurate hallucinations, if you get my drift. So anyway, but we literally have almost, I don't want to say thousands. We surely have hundreds, probably over 1,000 validated cases. Dr. Janice Holden did an amazing study. She actually compounded 37 different studies looking at the accuracy of the reports of people who had been, clinically dead, that, the flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, et cetera. And in those studies, that's well over, several hundred patients. She found that 80% reported the data that they were seeing 100% accurately, using the strictest standards, that if they made even one slight mistake, variant from what they saw, that would be discounted as an inaccurate statement. 80%. Any lawyer would be glad to have this in a courtroom, I assure you, with real, quote-unquote, living people. So my point is that what we see is a lot of this evidence. It's so compounded, as I said, that the New York Academy of Sciences has basically judged, that there's a credible possibility that your consciousness will survive bodily death. Let's go further, though, just a little bit. And we can also see a second kind of evidence that's very important, and that is the blind people. Now, it's not just Dr. Kenneth Ring that studied blind people, right? Dr. Pim von Lommel has studied the blind people. Bruce Grayson has studied the blind. So there's tons and tons of studies that have been done on blind people. The main thing is 80%, get this matters to me, 80% of blind people, most of whom are blind from birth, see for the first time when they're clinically dead and there's no electrical activity in the cerebral or frontal cortices. This is not, the other thing that's really strange here is, they don't have any visual images in their physical brains. How can you possibly appeal to a hallucination, a stimulation of the temporal or parietal lobes, dreamlets? But if there's nothing there to hallucinate or to dream on a visual basis, how in the world would you get an accurate visual accounting of what this blind person is seeing? For example, a 16-year-old boy, Bradley Burroughs, this really gets the students. There's several of them that are very, very good. But Bradley is 16 years old, never seen a thing in his life. And he has a heart attack. He, finds himself actually outside of the hospital and up near the roof of the hospital. And he's looking out. Now, he sees, these tracks that are grooved into the snow. And not being an unintelligent lad, he thinks, well, trains or trams have parallel tracks. Maybe those are the grooves of, tram tracks or train track that's passing by the hospital, and there they are grooved into the snow. He sees this big these trees in the foreground that are ahead of him, and he sees then a tram coming by. It's got a big, huge sign on the back of it with an arrow pointing to the right. The tram goes by, and sure enough, it goes to the right and goes inside that, toward that grove of trees where obviously the tracks are extended. Now, if there's one thing trams and trains have, it's schedules, down to the second. We know when Bradley had his heart attack. We know 10 seconds after he had his heart attack. We know when that tram was passing by the east wall of that hospital. We know that it did turn into those grove of trees. Just saying, how would you hallucinate this if you didn't have a single visual image in your brain throughout your whole life? not possible. It really is a remarkable, and this, by the way, we have them accounted for again and again. But I am getting too detailed. I want to get to the third thing here, and that is the recounting of stories. So when, as I said, when children and adults move to the other side, right, to a heavenly domain, they are often greeted by relatives, who are really, transformed. The children, about 60% of the time, the children have no idea who this relative is. It's a relative who died way before the child was born. And so the child is just kind of looking at this person. The person comes up and says, well, I'm your great aunt so-and-so, or I'm, your grandfather who died, in the war, or whatever the case is. And of course, the child is sitting there listening to the entire story and so forth and so on. And then these researchers at the University of Virginia, Grayson and Kelly, have been actually trying to make a big, huge accounting of all these stories that were told. See, children are especially good because they really don't have an agenda drum to beat. They basically are just saying, well, I saw Grandpa, and he told me I could call him Grandpa. And he said that he did this stuff and that stuff, and here's, what happened to him during the war and so forth. And so, of course, they, Grace and Kelly, they say, okay, here's a photo array of people, and they pick one out of what the grandfather looked like when he was 30, right? Not when he was 80. But when he was 30 years old, something that the child couldn't possibly know, and they put it in the midst of 10, 15 other photographs and say, who is he? Which one was he? That one. Almost every time. It's almost like, this is way beyond the odds that this is going to happen. But you get the point. I mean, pretty much these children can give very exact accountings of things that had happened to these deceased relatives and friends. They can pick them out of a photo array, what they looked like when they were 20 to 30 years old, etc. And so, again, it just counts as one other, in this kind of a forensic bank of evidence, that you're putting together. And then finally, of course, you have the phenomenon of the loss of subconscious death anxiety in these kids. Now, conscious death anxiety can be controlled. So you all out there have faith, I guess. Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So, I mean, the main thing is you have faith, and because of that faith, your hope and eternity, your conscious death anxiety might be under control. But the subconscious death anxiety, I can still show you, skull and crossbones, or sharks with big nasty teeth, or daggers with blood dripping from them, and you're going to have a subconscious reaction to that a modified polygraph will pick up in 2 seconds. Not these kids. These kids have one near-death experience, and they don't have any measurable subconscious death anxiety. And what's even more interesting is that 30 years after the fact, this has been going on for 30 years, by the way, 30 years after the fact, they still don't have a measurable subconscious death anxiety. And that just seems to happen in only one instance, when people claim they have had near-death experience. I just put this together, and the reason I spend so much time on it is because it's not, I think there's a lot of good data. And this really good data that's done by very careful studies, longitudinal studies, is what enabled not just the New York Academy of Sciences, but other people whose reputations are on the line. And by the way, that consensus statement was done by 27 doctors and scientists, neuroscientists and other specialists that came together to do that for the New York Academy of Sciences. Okay, I'll just leave it at that for just a moment. I want to discuss 2 other related phenomena that sort of substantiate this notion of the soul body that I have talked about. And the first is a phenomenon called terminal lucidity, and then I'm going to discuss intelligence in hydrocephalic patients. With respect to terminal lucidity, this name attaches to a phenomenon where about 2 hours before death, a person who is really beleaguered for 10 years by Alzheimer's, has amyloid plaques everywhere to be found in his or her brain, right? Pretty much has learned nothing for years, and has been reduced to almost a state of quasi-vegetation because of this disease, or brain lesions, or brain trauma, anything that's basically reduced their cognitional function and their functions of recollection to almost nothing, right? People who just don't have the physical brain to think and have not demonstrated any thinking or cognitional activity for more than 5 years, suddenly they awaken. And they are as lucid as you and I, you and me. I mean, literally. These people, Bob, I've got this funeral to plan. You're a priest. Would you mind going ahead and performing the funeral for me? And of course, these doctors are looking at this person going, who are you? I mean, it's just like, how can you be saying these things? The next thing, of course, that, a person will wake up and just go, I've left my will undone. Now, this person couldn't have had a thought about a will, let alone all the various places where the will was left ambiguous and so forth, and recollects just fine what's going on. Other people will recount religious experiences that happened to them when everybody thought they were kind of unconscious or vegetative and so forth and so on. And so they basically recount these things and with perfect clarity. And I'm going to talk about the indications of what that might mean for a transcendent body in just a moment. But the main thing is Dr. Rudolf Tanzi, who's been researching this along with several other researchers. Tanzi's at Harvard University, but several people are doing it at Duke and University of Virginia as well. And basically, here's how Tanzi sums it up, and Michael's going to read this.
The events of terminal lucidity, even in Alzheimer's patients who were barely conscious, who were barely responsive, well, we hear them all the time. How suddenly a patient can, just before death, say their goodbyes to their loved ones, remembering their names, maybe recalling an event after a decade or so of not learning, of having lost first their short-term memory and then their long-term memory. It is a complete mystery, but it is undeniable that it happens, and it is amazing.
So, again, there you have it. What are the implications in terms of the transcendent body? This thing is really a mystery because, as I said, in a near-death experience, you have a complete detachment from the physical body. And so this transcendent body, this what I'm going to call soul body, transcendent soul body, it's kind of on its own. Here, you kind of have a hybrid. So it looks like, from the vantage point of some of these researchers, that it looks like the damaged parts of the body, a physical body, begin to detach from this transcendent soul body. So let's say the brain damaged Alzheimer's patient, that brain seems to be detaching from this transcendent soul body. And so then right at that moment, maybe this soul body is communicating not with the damaged cerebral and frontal cortices, it's actually communicating with the lower brain. In other words, this transcendent soul body is doing the thinking, but it's mediated to the physical body and the physical world through maybe the lower brain and the central nervous system. So something's happening, but it seems like the detachment is happening with the damaged part first. And so I'll leave it at that. It's not well understood, but something is happening to suggest that there's a partial detachment, allowing the transcendent soul body to do the thinking, but allowing the physical body to continue to mediate those thoughts through the physical body, the physical vocal cords, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's go to the phenomenon of intelligence in hydrocephalic patients. This is a baffler. But again, we have to recognize this data, right? We don't want to be like everybody who tried to laugh Einstein off the proverbial academic stage. When Einstein said, well, there really isn't any ether. There's a relativistic system through which light is traveling, and this it's a variable system of measurement according to how fast the object in question produces a reference frame approaching the speed of light. Everybody said, that's nonsense. You mean to say that a ruler that's coming near the speed of light is very, very small and collapse, and then a ruler that's just traveling normal speed is like a normal ruler? That you have variable length, and everybody's, Einstein says, yes, that's exactly right. And everybody tried to laugh him off the proverbial. He was right. But he was right because he wanted to recognize three pieces of data that everybody else wanted to ignore because they were inconvenient for the old Newtonian system. All I'm saying is, anybody who thinks that a physicalist explanation of consciousness is going to last for a long time, I defy it. I just don't think so. I see people, good physicists like Henry Stapp and so forth, I'll talk about later, they're changing their minds. Pim van Lommel just says, we're going to have to deal with this, everybody. Consciousness is not just the physical brain. There's something profound going on beyond it, and it has survivability capabilities beyond the physical brain. And we have to acknowledge it, and we have to acknowledge the extended embodiment that goes along with it. And so I'll just leave it at that for the moment. Let's get to intelligence in hydrocephalic patients. Okay, as most of you know, hydrocephalus, very unfortunate, is when the spinal fluid starts going up through the cranium, and it starts basically destroying and replacing brain tissue in the cranium. And it just keeps working its way up and up and up and up until, of course, there's only about 2, 3, 4% of the brain left pushed against the top of the skull, and pretty much everything else is brain tissue is destroyed and replaced by spinal fluid. Now, one would think, gosh, if a person only has about 3 or 4% of their brain left, that's not good for thinking. But in point of fact, there have been, and for several decades now, it started in Germany, but now has come to Great Britain and the United States. And of course, what they recognize is the following three things. Some people actually maintain a normal IQ when they have 95% of their cranium occupied by spinal fluid, less than 5% of brain tissue left in the cranium. How can you have a normal IQ under any physical definition of thinking? Now, I admit there have been some outliers that have tried to explain this. It's really tough. But Dr. Lorber published especially these studies in Germany essentially, but he basically did 600 brain scans of people who had severe hydrocephalus. So that would be over 95% of their brain was replaced by spinal fluid. And in those tests, he found that 5%, 30 individuals, had a global IQ of 100. Now, this is the day before they raised all the IQ scores. So, basically, a global IQ of 100 was normal at that time. Now, of course, what's even more interesting is that he found that several of them had genius-level IQs with less than 5% of their physical brain. Michael's just going to read a quote from Michael Naum, who summarized Lorber's findings in his study.
After performing more than 600 scans on hydrocephalic patients, Lorber put forward the provocative question, is your brain really necessary? He found that about 30 individuals had a global IQ greater than 100, despite cerebrospinal fluid instead of brain tissue filling 95% or more of their crania. Lorber loved citing the story of a student of mathematics whose global IQ was 126, his verbal IQ even reaching 143. In his case, instead of the normal 4.5 centimeter thickness of brain tissue between the ventricles and the cortical surface, there was just a thin layer of mantle measuring a millimeter or so. The boy has virtually no brain.
I don't know how you can get a genius level IQ in a boy with no brain, virtually no brain. All I can say is it's not the brain doing the thinking. Something else is doing the thinking. And I would maintain it is that same transphysical consciousness, physical cognitional apparatus that is there. And furthermore, I would maintain that it is, again, part and parcel of an extended self-moving embodiment that mediates interpersonal relationship. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that's what's doing the thinking. And the rest of it, right, it's not even going to be mediated to the lower brain. It's going to just be mediated directly to the central nervous system. That is a very interesting set of facts as we try to piece together this mystery of what consciousness is. Pardon? Okay. Okay. This kid I gotta move. So, but you get the point. I do want to say just one thing about, Ryan was saying yesterday, assisted suicide's coming our way. And all I want you to know is this matter of euthanasia and assisted suicide, and, I think it's going to move to involuntary euthanasia. This kind of research needs to be taken into consideration before anything happens. I mean, if the terminal lucidity studies are true, if people really did have spiritual experiences of God, could actually hear what people were trying to say and do for them, even when they were like lights out Alzheimer's, seemingly vegetative, right, and so forth, and they could actually apperceive this. I mean, to kill a person like that with their personhood, at least what I'm going to call transphysically intact, is just unethical. And Dr. Happich, Friedrich Happich, he put it this way. I mean, after he had witnessed dozens of these cases, this is what he said in response to euthanasia.
The most mentally challenged individuals with IQs between 0 and 25 are not inferior to normal persons in the deepest sense. I have lived through various virtually shattering experiences, some of which I have experienced together with the chief physician of our institution, Dr. Wittenman. These experiences have shown me that even the most mentally challenged individuals with IQs between 26 and 50 lead a hidden inner life which is just as valuable as my own inner life. It is only the destructed surface that hinders them to show it to the outside. Often in the last hours before death, all pathological obstructions fell away and revealed an inner life of such beauty that we could only stand in front of it, feeling shaken to the core. For somebody who has witnessed such events, the entire question of legally controlled euthanasia is completely finished.
So I think we just have to consider, this, and as we take this crazy societal train ride down the assisted suicide track, which in Holland led to involuntary euthanasia almost like the night following the day. I mean, I just think we need to consider more robust notions of consciousness than the physicalist can muster. So anyway, I just want to quickly, I didn't mention this, but I have to say physicalist explanations do not work. Can you flip back to those slides, that slide, Michael? They do not work, and the reason that they do not work is the following. Number one, physicalist explanations cannot explain the 100% accurate reporting of veridical data by 80% of people who are remote from their bodies, not close to the operating room, but somewhere in the waiting room, somewhere in the hospital, somewhere outside the hospital, somewhere remote from the body. Just can't explain it. It's just not possible. Number two, certainly physicalist explanations cannot explain how 80% of blind people, most of whom are blind from birth and had no visual images in their physical brains, can explain this. But now let's just take a look at three other ways in which near-death experiences and physicalist explanations differ. Physicalist explanations, that would be hallucinations, dreamlets, stimulation of the temporal lobe, stimulation of the parietal lobe, anoxia, psychologically induced hallucination, etc. Let's just compare the two of them. Number one, A near-death experience, in a near-death experience, the patient has a flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils, and no gag reflex. No electrical activity in the brain to speak of except for the sputterings of neurons in the lower brain. Now, you go to stimulation of the parietal lobe, stimulation of the temporal lobe, hallucinations. Every single physicalist explanation requires that the brain have electrical activity in order to generate the hallucination or the dreamlet or whatever it is. Totally different brain scans. Number two, in the case of near-death experiences, 80% of the patients report 100% accurate data and about 20% nearly 100% accurate data. This is not true in hallucinations. Hallucinations are notoriously inaccurate and downright weird most of the time. And so, to use that technical term. And so the main thing, of course, is let's take a look at the mood, the emotional difference between a near-death experience and physicalist explanation. Near-death experience, well, if people go to a heavenly domain, this is not true for the dark domain, but if people go to a heavenly domain, they definitely have a very peaceful and very, almost fulfilling experience, whereas people who are hallucinating, having dreamlets, obviously they are definitely agitated and continue to be agitated by the experience. So these are just totally different phenomena. I just don't think physicalist explanations stand up to any kind of scientific scrutiny. And about the 30 guys that I've tried to mention, including the 27 scientists who were in the consensus statement of the New York Academy of Sciences, don't think they really stand up to real scrutiny. Okay, let's just zoom over really quickly. I just want to say, what is I'm going to flip forward then, to the, what is a transcendent soul body? What is it anyway? I'm just going to point out the features that I've already pointed out. I'm just going to do it very briefly. But make no mistake about it. We are not just physical material beings. We are a complex of the physical material, yes, but also what I'm going to call the spiritual / transcendent that is part of us, or transcendent, another word for that is transphysical, beyond physics, beyond physical. So we're complex, and I'm going to call it, I'm sure Bishop Barron used the word unity, not just a complex, because an aggregate means you can separate them. I'm going to say that it's a unity, an inseparable unity between these dimensions. Let me try and explain this really, really quickly. Just what are some features of this transcendent soul body? Number one, as I said, there is obviously the sense of extension. By the way, the evidence for this is people themselves, right? Who experience themselves as embodied in a large number of the near-death experience cases we have. And secondly, that people who move to the heavenly domain see their relatives. They can see an extended, self-moving body that is mediating their emotions through their facial features and so forth, and feel that their facial features and their embodiment and body language is also mediating a connection and intimacy with those people who are greeting them in this heavenly kingdom. So there's lots of reasons to believe we have this body, and it's a unity of what I'm going to call the soul, this self-consciousness and so forth, with this spiritualized body, this soul body, that it is there, and lots of witnesses to it. So just a few differentiating features. Number one differentiating feature is not subject to physical laws and processes and structures. So that's the new transcendent body can go through walls and defy gravity. The second thing is that it can be self-moving, but oftentimes it is moved by a force beyond itself when it goes vast distances, like to a heavenly domain or goes somewhere remote outside the hospital, etc. So those kinds of things pretty clearly they're being moved, but nevertheless the body is self-moving. Number three, the absence of physical and emotional pain. So once you're in that transcendent soul body, the physical pain attached to the body is gone. And then finally, of course, the vision, I didn't mention this, but vision oftentimes is 360 degrees. And that's not in all patients, but in some patients, there does seem to be an ability to see completely around you in every context. And finally, of course, the continued transformation of one's emotional state after the fact, you're back in your physical body. The emotional state of peace and love persists after the experience, even to the loss of subconscious death anxiety. Okay, so those are some differences. I just want to quickly, before I get into this whole quantum area, I'm going to have to, Michael, can you just read real quickly the Linda Stewart thing so people, you can see, Linda Stewart, I picked this one because she manifests pretty much all the things I was just talking about.
Passionless, I watched my spirit leave my body as a feeling of otherness engulfed me. I felt a strange detachment from my physical body and the life I had created. I was not connected to my suffering body, and yet I still existed, but in a new state of being. Gone was the wrenching pain that had accompanied my every waking moment. The strain of expanding my lungs to gasp for air had disappeared. Fatigue, which had weighted my life for years, had lifted. Depression no longer drained my mind of hope. Sight and sounds did not sear my head with pain, leaving me emotionally bereft. And yet I still existed. I felt weightless and calm. Although I knew I was not in the lifeless body lying on my bed, and that the eyes and brain I had previously identified as mine were in that body with which I no longer identified, I was still aware of sight and thoughts and sensations. I observed my new reality with tranquility. I became aware of a deep sense of peace and warmth that permeated my senses. I was suddenly buffeted by a powerful, energetic force that swooped beneath and lifted me, carrying me upward. Barely conscious, I felt peaceful and loved immeasurably. I knew I was in the arms of a being who cherished me with perfect love and carried me from the dark void into a new reality. With the eyes of my soul body, I looked to see what held me in such love, and I beheld a radiant spirit being, so magnificent and full of love that I knew I would never again feel the sense of loss. I have no way of explaining how, but I knew the Spirit was Christ.
Okay. Can you skip to the chart, Mike, at the end? Okay. I'm just going to go through this chart. Typical Spitzer, I bloviated my way to the end of the talk. But let's just take a look at these three components of this. And when I talk about components, I don't mean aggregate components. I mean unified components. Here's, obviously there is some kind of a soul there. And that soul is capable of what they call transphysical consciousness. I'm just going to summarize this in a nutshell. Self-consciousness and abstract or conceptual intelligence is incredibly hard to reduce to physical processes and structures. I have that summarized, those arguments summarized in chapter 5 of this book, Science at the Doorstep to God. But the main thing to remember is there's really good arguments. Lonergan's argument in the Verbum articles of what Aquinas said in his arguments that are super good. Number 2, Sir John Eccles, totally great book, Evolution of the Brain, Creation of the Self, just shows you the same kind of, impossibility of reducing self-consciousness to physical processes and structures. Another really excellent one is David Chalmers' book, the Oxford, The Conscious Mind, toward a complete theory. This Chalmers book, you should read it. If you're a more analytically oriented, Chalmers is the person for you. But again, the non-reducibility self-consciousness. Then, of course, there are a variety of other books, but I do have those things summarized in chapter 5. Gotta move. The one thing I do want to say, though, is that soul, that transphysical component. We're transcendent. That's what I want to say. And that transcendent component, that ability for us to be aware of our awareness, I mean, that is just such a remarkable thing, almost implying an infinite velocity. I mean, it's not like a dog catching its tail. It's like a dog swallowing itself. I mean, how do you do that in a physical system limited by the speed of light? Answer, you don't. There's something weird about you guys. You're very transcendent, and you do transcendent things, and your abstract consciousness is transcendent, and you have a soul. Just saying, you are transcendental. The second thing, though, is that soul is unified with, not just embedded in, it's unified with that spiritualized body that I've been talking about the entire time. That's the second block there. And that spiritualized body mediates personhood, right? It relationships with each other. It's extended, it's self-moving. It gives us the same kinds of sense of freedom and the sense of voluntariness and the sense of voluntary love that we have in our own physical bodies. And the third thing is the physical body. I know I don't have time for this. I'm just going to confuse you for 1 second. I think there are three good, excellent theoreticians on this that really matter. Sir John Eccles, he works with a guy named Friedrich Beck, excellent quantum theorist. Second person is a guy named David Bohm. He works with several other people on this same problem, the mind-body deal. How do we get this transphysical soul body? How do we get it merged with the physical body? All these people, and Henry Stapp too, he's a subjective reductionist guy who is very, very important. But anyway, my point is just simply this by way of my last comment. Quantum fields hold the potential for the merge, for the mediation. Because every single cell, every single electron in your body, every one of them has a more fundamental disposition of a quantum field. The quantum field is bivalent. Basically, it has a mind-like component, and that mind-like component is a superposition. It's no definite place or no definite momentum. It's just a superposition of potential places and momentums that are essentially in a probabilistic format that I won't go into. But it's mind-like. There's nothing definite, classical, matter-like there. But at the same time, when you have what's called the collapse, the reduction of the quantum field, the superposition, to an eigenstate, to a classical physical thing, like a particle, an electron, which can do things to other electrons or protons, et cetera, once that happens, you've got a matter-like component. And so what Boehm and Eccles and these guys, what they're holding out is, and Beck too, are holding out is the way of merging the physical body with this transphysical soul body that we've been talking about. The way to do that is, of course, the intention, the mental intention from the soul being mediated through this transphysical soul body. Actually, and Henry Stapp has shown this, that subjective intentions can affect certain kinds of physical properties in the body. And so that intention can be mediated through the quantum field. The superposition is sensitive to that intention. It collapses the superposition to the classical eigenstate, which can affect other kinds of things in the physical body, at which point Heather's very important systematic presentation takes hold. Anyway, that's the best I can do in an hour, actually a little over an hour, and thank you very, very much for your kind attention today.